To hype or not to hype? That is the question. To be more specific, XDefiant. Is this game the real deal, or is it just another flash-in-the-pan shooter? Well, having played in the closed playtests last year, the closed beta earlier this year, and recently the open beta, I'm making this video to attempt to answer that very question. However, before we go any further, there is something that you absolutely need to know. I've been a Call of Duty fanboy for most of my life, and I have a very special place in my heart for that franchise. While I understand that XDefiant is not Call of Duty, I think the main selling point for the game at the moment is that it might serve as a Call of Duty alternative for those who are unhappy with the current state of COD. People like myself, for example. So this video is very much going to be XDefiant from a Call of Duty player's perspective. Now, if you're not a Call of Duty player, this video might not be as useful to you, but you can just hit the subscribe button and keep your eyes peeled on your sub feed, because when the game fully releases later this year, I'll definitely be doing another video on it from a more objective point of view. Alright, so let's get some basic details out of the way. XDefiant is a free-to-play, first-person arena shooter being developed by Ubisoft San Francisco. Notably, the executive producer of the game is Mark Rubin, who was also executive producer at Infinity Ward during the golden era of Call of Duty. So he worked on games like the original Modern Warfare 1 and 2, and also, apparently, this is him on the cover. According to the developers, the game's main focus is satisfying gunplay and in-depth class customization. The game is 6v6, and while it clearly takes a lot of inspiration from classic Call of Duty, it does have a fresh take on some things. The faction system, for example, gives the game kind of an Overwatch vibe. Each faction has a passive ability, piece of equipment, and ultimate ability. They're also themed after other Ubisoft IP like Splinter Cell or Far Cry, making this kind of like the Super Smash Brothers of shooters. So you get to pick which faction you want to play as, and then you have your gun customization, which is separate from your faction. The maps are also themed after Ubisoft IP, and as far as game modes, you have some basic ones like Domination and King of the Hill, and a handful of progression modes like Escort, where you have to push a payload through the map. Now that you're up to speed with the basics of the game, we can start getting into the nitty-gritty. In order to keep this video at least somewhat organized, I figured I'd split it up into two main sections. First the good stuff, then the bad. And after, we'll wrap up by answering the titular question, and also, yes, we will be addressing the elephant in the room. Could XDefiant be the long-fabled Call of Duty killer? Buckle up and let's find out. So, the good stuff. Let's rattle off a few gameplay features that I'm really happy to see in XDefiant as a legacy Call of Duty player. Persistent lobbies and map voting. This means your lobby won't break up after every single match, and you all get the chance to vote for which map you play next.
I love democracy.
No skill-based matchmaking. That's right, according to the developers, there is no manipulative SBMM in XDefiant. There is, however, team balancing after a lobby's been created to help keep matches competitive. A Call of Duty-like prestige system, where you have the option to reset all of your unlocks after hitting max rank in exchange for some in-game rewards. A while back, I did an entire video on why the classic prestige system needs to return to COD, so needless to say, I am ecstatic that this is going to be in XDefiant. Although we don't know a lot about this yet, and it won't be in the game at launch, but according to Mark Rubin, it will come to the game at some point. And the game features a classic Call of Duty style minimap, meaning that any player firing an unsuppressed weapon will appear as a tiny little red dot on your minimap. This is admittedly a small thing, but I think it does wonders for the flow and pace of gameplay. And if you don't believe me, just try playing any of the new Call of Duty games that don't have this feature. But speaking of gameplay, the game generally feels fast and frenetic, which I've learned that not everyone loves, but I certainly do. The movement took me a few hours to get used to, but once I did, I really started to enjoy it. And this is where we're gonna start doing some pretty hard comparisons to Call of Duty. I'm not totally sure why, but modern Call of Duty has become very anti-movement. Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2 especially. Whether it's removing exploits like slide canceling or nerfing techniques that have always been in Call of Duty like jump shotting. But it almost doesn't even matter, because even if you could do those things, the audio and map design ensure that you wouldn't be able to take full advantage of it. To be clear, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a bad thing. Maybe they just wanted to put an emphasis on positioning or gun skill or other things beside movement. I get it. But for me personally, that is just dreadfully boring, and it's one of the reasons why Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2 is really hard for me to play. So I am very happy to report that XDefiant has no problem letting you move around. I wouldn't say that the movement in the game is exceptional, phenomenal, but compared to Call of Duty, it's god tier. It's fast, but also not like crackhead fast. You can slide or jump to maintain speed, but spamming either one will eventually slow you down, so that keeps the game somewhat grounded. Although I will say that I wish the slide gave you a little bit more of a speed boost, just to help you get around those corners a little faster. Another small thing that I actually appreciate quite a bit is reload canceling, which if you don't know is the ability to cancel your reload midway through. Pretty much any shooter has a way to reload cancel, so this is something that I'm just used to doing no matter what I'm playing. With Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2, however, you actually can't reload cancel. Once the magazine has left your weapon, you must finish the rest of the animation before you can start shooting again. Realistic? Very. Fun? Not so much in my opinion. XDefiant not only includes the ability to reload cancel, but also has the most streamlined way of doing it I've ever seen in a shooter. You can sprint to cancel your reload, which is how Call of Duty used to work, but you can also just aim down sights and that will immediately cancel out of it. And if you find that annoying, there's even a setting where you can toggle it on or off. Gun customization is also something that I've really liked about the game so far. Not because it's the most incredible in-depth customization I've ever seen, but actually because it's kind of the opposite. The gun customization in XDefiant does have depth to it, but it's also very straightforward and understandable. For the most part, it works like the gunsmith in modern Call of Duty does, but it's nowhere near as indulgent. There's a modest amount of attachments to pick from, and they have easy and understandable effects on your weapon. Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2 features so many attachments in each slot that I often find myself feeling overwhelmed when building out a weapon, especially since the attachment names and stated effects aren't exactly clear as to what it's actually gonna do for you. In my opinion, XDefiant gives you just enough customization to tailor your weapon to your playstyle, but doesn't overwhelm you with 50 different attachments that all do more or less the same thing. I think there will probably be more attachment options when the full game launches, but I doubt that'll ruin how clean and simple it feels. There's also more detailed stats and numbers you can look at if you want to be more aware of the exact effects that attachments have on your gun, which is super useful. The maps are another high point for the game. Although to be fair, I think I would need a lot more time with the game before I could give my definitive opinion on the maps. But as far as my early impressions go, they're colorful and easy to look at. I like how they're set in unique and memorable locations as opposed to generic warehouse or street with cars. And above all else, what I like about them the most right now is that they're the right size. Infinity Ward has been hellbent on making the biggest maps they can get away with in Call of Duty. Again, no disrespect if this is your jam, but personally, I don't like a lot of downtime in between fights in an arena shooter. I don't like the feeling of not knowing where the action is. In general, I don't think a game of team deathmatch should play out like a game of hide and seek, and thank goodness, because XDefiant does not feel that way. The maps are an appropriate size for a 6v6 game that's meant to be fast-paced. I also like the way the map design and spawn system harken back to a sense of map control that used to be present in Call of Duty. What I mean by this is that you have a better idea of your team's side of the map and the other team's side of the map. The flow of combat just makes more sense, and you're rewarded for controlling the map in the right way. The last thing I want to mention in the good portion of this video is the faction system. Although it's not perfect, and we will talk about this in the bad section as well. But I wanted to mention it here because overall, I do like the idea. I think it helps modernize the game. Without it, it might feel a little too old school or maybe even feel too much like a shameless COD ripoff. But this adds something new to the formula and some variety to the gameplay. There's kind of a tank healer DPS thing going on, which I think is super cool. Libertad can heal nearby teammates, Echelon is kind of like a human UAV, and Phantoms get extra health and a shield to help anchor down your team's position. This is the kind of thing that can separate the game from Call of Duty, and also can keep it fresh as they keep adding new factions post-launch. So that does it for the good stuff. As you can see, it's a pretty hefty list. But now let's get into the bad. First and foremost, honestly, my biggest complaint with the game at the moment is the netcode. It is not good. Basically, what this means is that sometimes when you're playing, it feels like you have a really terrible internet connection. Like you're getting shot around corners or your bullets aren't registering when you're hitting someone. Luckily, this does seem like the type of thing that Ubisoft can fix. Will they? We don't know for sure, but it's at least doable. The next big weak point of the game, I think, is a general feeling of clunkiness that mainly comes from the animations. Throwing a grenade, for example, just doesn't feel right. Same goes for mantling. Although it's fast and I appreciate that, it just doesn't look or feel as smooth as it should. I think the bad netcode also contributes to that feeling of clunkiness, but it mainly comes from these janky animations. To give credit where credit is due, this is something that Infinity Ward has done extremely well with Call of Duty. Modern Warfare Warfare Roman numeral 2 has the best animations I've ever seen in a first-person shooter, hands down. And that's probably why it feels so jarring when I play XDefiant. I'm used to seeing these amazing and smooth animations, so these ones feel pretty bad by comparison. Next up, weapon and faction balance. To be honest, I was on the fence about whether or not I should even include this in the bad section, because overall I think the game feels pretty balanced, especially considering the fact that it's still so new. But I will say that the snipers feel a little overpowered, and I think a handful of factions could use a buff, like the DeadSec faction, which lets you hack enemy equipment. It's kinda fun and can be useful, but it's really circumstantial. And the same goes for their ultimate ability. It just lets you prevent others from using their ultimate, so not super useful in a variety of situations. I think that faction could probably just use a top to bottom rework. Right now it seems like the most used faction by far is Libertad, because that's the one that lets you heal and get back into the action as quick as possible, and that's just generally the playstyle that people enjoy. But I'm hoping that they can tune up the other classes to make them a little more appealing, so that you'll see more faction variety in each match. I do have some dumb little complaints that I figured I'd throw in here, like the writing for the announcers and the player characters is pretty hard to listen to sometimes. Also, I know I'm in the minority here, but I really liked the punk rock graffiti style aesthetic that the game had when it was first revealed. I understand that there was some backlash after the game's reveal because of that aesthetic, but that was mainly because it clashed so hard with the use of Tom Clancy's name in the title. And since they've removed that, thank goodness by the way, I think it would be fine to revert back to that wild aesthetic. I just think the more generic one that they've switched to is a little boring. Oh, and also I still don't like the name. Never did and probably never will. I know they won't ever change it, but I had to get that off my chest. And let's wrap up the bad section with this. XDefiant is simply not going to have the same amount of money poured into it that Call of Duty does. And that might be its biggest weakness. People have been throwing around the COD killer title with XDefiant, but I think we need to be realistic with just how much of an underdog XDefiant is here. Things like bugs will take a longer time to get fixed. New content will take them longer to create. And visually, the game is just never gonna have the same graphical fidelity as a modern Call of Duty game. I mean, say what you will about Call of Duty, but it does generally have AAA quality polish to it. But believe it or not, I actually do think that XDefiant does have a few advantages over Call of Duty. While Call of Duty development is fragmented into supporting 4 or 5 main modes, XDefiant will only be focused on one, the core 6v6 arena shooter experience. So if that's what you enjoy, which I do, then every single update, every new season will directly benefit you. That's one of the hard things about being a traditional 6v6 COD player. When a new season comes out and there's a mountain of new content, but then you realize only a small fraction of it actually applies to you. And the other advantage is one that I don't think a lot of people have realized yet, so let me blow your mind. XDefiant is a free-to-play live service game. Call of Duty has a new $70 release every year, which completely wipes the slate clean. So any cosmetics you bought in the previous game are now useless. All of the maps, modes, weapons, and any other content that was added to the game over the course of its life cycle will also disappear. And the new game that's supposed to replace the old one will be in a very bare bones state, and will include lots of bugs and issues that are going to take time to fix. While XDefiant may not have an excess of content when it launches, and there might be bugs or other shortcomings, it will eventually fix those things and they will stay fixed. And after a year passes, it'll probably have finely tuned gameplay, lots of maps and modes, and a ton of cosmetics. And the best part is, none of those things will ever reset. Just like Fortnite or Apex Legends, the game will simply continue to be improved on the foundation that it's built for itself. So right now, it might be laughable to compare XDefiant with Call of Duty, but over time, XDefiant will only continue to get better, while COD kinda resets itself every year. That being said, is XDefiant the Call of Duty killer? I mean, anything is possible, but probably not. If next year Activision decided to make a real Call of Duty game with a focus on fast 6v6 gameplay, it would most likely be better than XDefiant in pretty much every way. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm such a COD fanboy, I would abandon XDefiant so fast. But like I've already alluded to a handful of times, Activision does not want to make a Call of Duty game. They want something else. They want Warzone or Escape from Tarkov or Destiny or whatever. But it's clear that they have no interest in the type of game that Call of Duty used to be. So that does leave the market up for grabs, and however small that market ends up being, I think XDefiant could could possibly fill that gap. So is this game worth the hype? If you're a legacy Call of Duty player, I think yes it is. This is worth being excited for and worth checking out when it releases, especially since it'll be free. That's not to say that I think the game will be a long-term success or even a huge hit on launch, but I think it's worth keeping an eye on. I think Mark Rubin and the team at Ubisoft genuinely have a lot of passion for the genre, and they're making an honest attempt at a classic COD feeling game with a modern twist. But you never really know how these things are going to turn out. So let me know, are you to hype or not to hype with XDefiant? Thank you for watching, and stay gold.